Hey everybody, Stacy and I this weekend have the privilege of being in Berlin visiting our campus there. And we're getting to hear stories of the amazing things that God is doing. We're also getting to visit their brand new location in the heart of Berlin, and that's been made possible because of your generosity. Now, as we're in Berlin, today we're also wrapping up our message series called The Anchored Life. And these last 8 weeks, as we've been reading through the New Testament together as a church family, God has done amazing things. So many lives have been changed. So many of you have discovered the beauty of God's word for the very first time. Others of you, your passion has been reignited. And I have just loved this season for us as a church family. Now, today as we wrap up, you're going to hear a message from Pastor Jason Williams, our executive pastor of ministries. He's going to bring a powerful message about being anchored in God's love. And in just a moment, we're going to welcome him as he brings the message. But before we go there, I want to make sure you know about two things. First of all, this week on Thursday, March 14th, we're going to have one huge celebration. We're going to celebrate and worship and just look back on all that God did through this series together. And it's going to be a moment that you don't want to miss. It's going to be an opportunity to encounter the presence of God, to encourage each other, and it's going to be at the Lake Forest campus on Thursday night. So for all of our stateside campuses, we want to encourage you to come on out to be a part of this huge celebration of all that God did through the Anchored Life series. Secondly, I want to make sure that you know on March 17th, that week at all of our campuses, we're going to be launching our brand new Activate experience with Step 1. Now, Step 1 is all about finding belonging as a part of God's family. You know, we as humans have two major needs. One, we want to be needed and make a difference with our lives. And number two, we want to be known. And there are a lot of you, you've been coming to Saddleback, perhaps you haven't found your place of connection. Maybe you haven't found community yet, but there's a place for you here. And we would love for you to be a part of this church family. And we're inviting you to come on out for the launch of this brand new experience. It's a historical moment. It's going to be about 2 hours long. You're going to hear more about God's big story and how that really ties into your story, that God made you specifically for a unique story that he wants you to live into. And there's going to be a meal together. There's going to be childcare. It's most importantly going to help you step into the fullness of God's purposes for your life. And I want to encourage you to sign up for that today. We already have so many people that are RSVP'd across all of our campuses. You can do that today when you go to your digital program or you go to the app. There will be a button that says Activate Step 1. We want to encourage you today to take that step to not miss out on the launch of Activate. Now, some of you might say, well, I'm already connected. I've been at Saddleback for a while. But there's also an opportunity to get reactivated through Activate Step 1. And for those of you who may have gone through 101 years ago, we want to invite you to come again through Step 1. It's a brand new experience that's going to help you in your journey as well. So take that step today, RSVP, let us know you're coming. It's going to be an awesome celebration as we launch Activate. Now, as Pastor Jason comes to the stage to bring the message about God's love, I love this guy. I'm so grateful for Jason. He's been a good friend. He's also doing so many amazing things and leading different areas of ministry in our church. And he has such a pastor's heart. I know today you're going to be blessed by him. So to all of our campuses, let's put our hands together and show some love for Pastor Jason as he comes to the stage.
Wow. I love you guys too. Hello, Saddleback. It is an honor to be here, and I want to welcome everybody tuning in from our campuses, online. We are so glad that you're here as we wrap up a truly momentous journey together as a church. If you've been along for the Anchored Life Challenge ride, good news, you're almost there. We can see the finish line off in the distance, and there's something about seeing that finish line that gives us the energy we need to complete it. And whether you're limping to that finish line or just now hitting your stride, I want to encourage you to finish strong. And if you stalled out somewhere along the way, no worries. You can still do that. Because this week we're going to be reading through some of the most powerful, some of the most hopeful words in the New Testament that I know will be an encouragement and a gift to you, whether you've participated in none or some or all of the Anchored Life Challenge. Now, before we jump in this week and set the stage for this upcoming week's reading, I want to pause for just a second and say a thank you to those of you who've made this incredible, life-changing experience possible. And I want to ask you to do something. I know it's not anyone's favorite, but if you host a book club at Lake Forest, at any of our campuses, even you guys online, could we have you just stand up for just a second? I promise it won't hurt a bit. If you're hosting a book club, an Anchored Life Challenge book club, would you stand up for just a second? Yeah, can we thank these guys? Let's give them a hand. You know, without you creating the space for the conversations that have led to incredible stories that we've heard throughout the journey, encouraging us all along the way as we've read, fell behind, you encourage us to keep going, and praying for us throughout this entire journey, this transformational moment in our church's life would not have been possible, and I just can't say more emphatically, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, if you're here for the very first time this weekend and you're suddenly wondering, what did I just walk into and what is going on here? We're really glad that you're here. And I want to just catch you up and let you know we're in the final leg of an 8-week journey, a challenge that we accepted 7 weeks ago to do something semi-heroic, to read through the New Testament during a year that we knew was going to be pretty tumultuous for a number of reasons as a way of anchoring our lives in God's reassuring and life-giving words. And it has been an incredible journey to date, and it's not quite over yet. And each weekend, we look ahead to the next week's reading and set the stage for what's to come. This week, we're going to be diving into John's writings. We're going to be finishing up the Gospel of John. We'll be in 1st through 3rd John, and we'll also read Revelation together. Now, John, he was part of Jesus' inner circle and knew him as well as anyone. This week, we're going to zero into 1 John, an urgent and impassioned letter that he wrote to some friends of his that's as timely and as relevant to us today as it was to them. So what was so urgent? Well, John had caught word that there were some false teachers popping up in churches that he'd had a hand in starting, peddling a cheap imitation of the good news that he had spent a lifetime sharing, and he wasn't about to let them get away with it. In fact, in 1 John 4:1, he kind of calls them out. And in the letter, he writes, "Dear friends, don't believe everyone who claims to speak by the Spirit. You must test them to see if the Spirit that they have comes from God. For there are many false prophets in the world." So it turns out that counterfeiting actually goes back a really long way, and it's only grown since then. I read this week that in 2023, it's estimated that as much as $3 trillion in counterfeit goods were sold worldwide over the past year, which is an incredible number. Any guesses as to what the most pricey item on the top 10 most counterfeited list is? I'm hearing murmured whispers. It's a Rolex watch. Rolex watch. In fact, it's estimated that there are more fake Bolex watches in circulation than there are actual Rolexes. Which explains why Rolex might be motivated to help people who are looking for the genuine experience to tell the difference between their masterfully crafted timepieces and the not so masterfully crafted Bolexes of the world. And one of the primary ways that they help people avoid that sinking feeling that comes from realizing that you got a Bolex 2 weeks later when the hands pop off and your wrist turns green is by outlining a series of tests that allow you to tell the difference between the real and the fake every time. Well, in this letter, in 1 John, John is doing the exact same thing, but with something far more valuable than a watch, even a Rolex. He clarifies what constitutes genuine faith and helps them spot the fakes that had popped up. And I got to tell you, no one was more qualified to do so. John had spent 3 years with Jesus. He knew what it was that made him laugh and what made him cry, what filled him with joy and what grieved him to the core. They had talked for hours. John had heard hundreds of sermons that Jesus had preached. If anyone knew his heart, God's heart, it was John. And he says as much at the opening of the letter in 1 John 1:1. He wrote to his friends, "We proclaim the one to you who existed from the beginning, whom we have heard and seen. We saw him with our own eyes, and we touched him with our own hands. He is the word of life." I can almost picture John at his table writing feverishly and thinking while he is, guys, come on, look, these noobs have no idea what they're talking about. They weren't there, but we were. And man, what we saw, what we felt, what we experienced was so incredible. I don't want you to miss it. Now, before you dive into 1 John this week, let me warn you, it can come across as a little bit scattered. In fact, you might be tempted to wonder if John was an adult who was unmedicated with ADHD, just reading it. And I don't know, maybe he was, but my guess is a more likely scenario is he was just so frustrated and so worried about the confusion and the chaos that was gripping and ripping this church apart that he didn't waste time organizing his thoughts. He just grabbed a pen, he grabbed a piece of paper, and set out to lay out 3 tests of authentic faith that he would come back to again and again and again that would help them recognize someone who had a genuine encounter with Jesus and the counterfeit every time. The first test that he lays out is the truth test. And we find it in 1 John 2, verse 22. He wrote, "And who is a liar? Anyone who says that Jesus is not the Christ." In essence, he says, look, if you've ever met the guy, truly gotten to know him, then you wouldn't be able to conclude anything else other than he is God's son sent to us to save us and to rescue us from our sins. So if you hear anybody else saying anything besides that, ignore them. Truth test. Second test is the life test. 1 John 2, verse 3 says, "And we can be sure that we know him if we obey his commandments." If someone claims, "I know God," but doesn't obey his commandments, that person is a liar and is not living in the truth. It's one thing, he says, to know the truth. It's another to actually live the truth, to trust his better way when his word and our perspective collide. Both are a part of the faith equivalent of a certificate of authenticity, but that validation isn't complete without the third test that I want to focus on today, and that test is the love test. 1 John 4, verse 7, he writes, "Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. But anyone who doesn't love does not know God, for God is love." This test was designed, it was a relational test to combat this idea that spirituality was about some sort of mystical knowledge that only a handful of a few people possessed. And these false teachers were actually shaming those who didn't have that special knowledge and going so far as to throw them out of the church. And John says, look, Rolex Christianity doesn't work that way. Love, we'll hear him say, is the highest value of Christian community and the deepest expression of real faith, not this mystical spirituality that they were peddling. But before we get to that and take a look at this love test, I do want to pause right here and acknowledge a couple cultural realities that make talking about love maybe a little bit trickier than it first seems. First off, the word love, right? It's a bit overused. The meaning of it's been sort of watered down over time. We use it to talk about everything. I mean, I do it. I use the same word to describe my affection for my wife as I do chocolate chip cookies. And those who know me best and know the number of cookies I eat might question whether or not they're close, but they're not. I hit the wife jackpot, not the same thing. And I'm not alone. I actually did a little search this week to find some stickers that people make. You can actually buy these online if you want to celebrate some of the things that we love, and they're right here. I love clowns. Does anyone? Maybe someone who has a family member who's a clown. I think that one, the black one, says, "I love math." It stretches me a little bit. It's been a while since math class. I love math. Math's a big part of our world, but love seems, yeah. I love being mad on the internet. This one I kind of believe, right? You would think so with just a few minutes spent online. And the last one, I don't really even know what to say about it other than, do you know what compost is? I don't know that I have to say a whole lot more. I mean, seriously. But there's another thing that makes this a trickier topic, and that's this, that for the most part, we all think that we know what love is, right? Now, there are a few exceptions like these guys and maybe the band Foreigner, who didn't seem to be able to figure it out on their own. But for the most part, we consider ourselves loving people, especially people who've placed their faith in Jesus. They thought that they had gotten what John was saying. But it's important to note who it is that he wrote this letter to. And we see that in 1 John 5:13. He says, I have written this to you who believe in the name of the Son of God. He wasn't writing to the Gordon Ramsays and Oscar the Grouches of the world. He was writing to people who had placed their faith in him and thought they understood his teaching. He was writing to us. And yet he still felt a need to write this letter to clear things up. And he doesn't do so in casual fashion or as a footnote to the other two tests. He uses the word agape. It's a Greek word, agape, 46 different times in this relatively brief letter. Agape isn't like an emotive or casual love. It's the strongest, most devoted love that's mentioned in the Bible. It's used to describe the overwhelming divine love of God for Jesus. And John uses it, he first mentions it in chapter 2, he comes back to it in chapter 3, and then in chapter 4, he really makes some emphatic statements about what it looks like to love others. And he doesn't just use the word to describe our love for God, he uses it to describe our love for each other. So apparently, it's a much bigger deal than maybe we first recognized. So what was it that they were missing? What was it that John was so determined to make sure that they knew and understood about what genuine love looked like that prompted him to lay out these tests to determine whether or not we've got a Rolex or a Bolex strapped to our wrist? Well, for starters, John makes it clear that authentic love, the kind that anchors us and the people around us, is active. 1 John 3:16, he wrote, we know what real love is because Jesus gave up his life for us. So we also ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. If someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need but shows no compassion, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. John here wants to make it clear that assumed love isn't love at all. Love, he says, isn't really love until it's expressed. It's not passive, and it's not based on good intentions. It's engaged. And yet, it's so easy for us to make the assumption that those around us know how we feel, which is why using our words to convey it is so vitally important. Now, it may seem at first like John's saying the exact opposite. Don't use words, but I don't think that's what's going on here. John would have known Proverbs 16:24. It says that gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul, and health to the body. I think John knew full well what we all know deep down, and that's that the words that we use and the words that we hear play a big role in loving and being loved. I remember a Sunday years ago, I was actually getting ready to go to church. I was late. I was going to speak that morning. I have my hand on the door handle thinking, I got to get there. And all of a sudden, I hear the pitter-patter of little feet running down the hallway. And my daughter at that time just slides into view and says, Daddy, Daddy, wait. Here she is. That's her. Yeah, right? So, true story. I'm the oldest of 3 boys, no sisters. We find out we're expecting our first child. We go to the doctor. It's a boy. Yep, of course it is. We go to the doctor the second time. It's a girl. Huh? I literally looked at the doctor and I said, are you sure? And he said, just quick as can be, he said, hey, I've been doing this a while. and I'm pretty confident in my grasp of basic anatomy. I wouldn't change it for the world, by the way. So there she is. I'm trying to leave. She's just slid into view. Daddy, wait. I'm about to tell her I got to go because I'm late. But before I could get that out, she follows up, Daddy, wait, with, hey, Daddy, are you proud of me? What do you do there? I told her, not now, and I ran off to go to church. Of course not. I scooped up in my arms. I got down on one knee so I could look her in the eye. And I told her not just that I was proud of her, but many of the reasons why. And as I did, she just smiled and lit up, beamed the whole time. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I can see the look on your face. Hey, geez, Dad, if you just told her every now and then she wouldn't have had to ask, right? I see you at our campuses. You're thinking it too. But see, that's just the thing. I did. I told her regularly that I loved her. And I pointed out things in her life that I thought made her beautiful on the inside and the outside, which is what I think makes that interaction so telling and such a glimpse into our souls and the way that we're wired. See, she in her innocence, she wasn't shy about asking for the thing that we crave and on some level desperately need. Reminders from the people that we love about the things we do well, the difference we make, the handcrafted masterpieces we were designed by God to be. All of us will have people in our lives, including ourselves, by the way, we do this, who will tell us otherwise, which is why it's so critical that we use our words to convey our love and to tell the people in our lives the great things that we see in them. Well, so if John isn't saying not use your words to convey love, well, then what is he saying? He's making an emphatic statement to drive home a point. Those false teachers, they had elevated the spiritual aspect of faith and life and diminished the physical aspect of faith and life. And to them, love was just a concept that never escaped the realm of words, which, now that I think about it, sounds kind of like today, doesn't it? Where love gets talked about a lot, but the seeds of love often die as mere sentiment or sympathy. But John goes on to say that pseudo-love, that hollowed-out love, that's not love. In essence, he's saying that love is a whole lot more than talk. Genuine love is about action. And our actions, we need to love even more so than we do with our words. Now, this week, as I was prepping and I was kind of thinking about that, I just grabbed my phone. I thought, let me make a list of some of the things that I've done to actively show love to people in my life. And I started on my list, and it grew with some pretty predictable things like surprises that I had thrown or help that I had offered or gifts I'd given, some of that kind of stuff. And as it grew, I kind of started feeling pretty good about myself. I mean, it wasn't a huge list, but it wasn't inconsequential either. But as I looked at it, something struck me. Everything on that list was something that I did on my time when it was convenient for me. And while it was all good and helpful and encouraging, I just couldn't shake the thought that John had something a little bit more significant in mind when he was describing genuine love. And as I sat with these 3 verses that we just read and let them just sink in a little bit, it hit me that authentic love is willing to be interrupted. Authentic love is willing to be interrupted. I mean, it's one thing to schedule acts of love that are convenient for me on my schedule, and can I just say it's important that we do so? In fact, helpful hint, if you're in a dating relationship and you use this message to excuse yourself from doing that, you will be very single very soon, I promise you. But John is using the ultimate interruption here. Jesus saying, I'll go. And leaving his perfect home with God to come to our rescue. And he describes a scene that we've likely all seen play out in our lives many times. Someone in our life, maybe a family member, maybe a friend, maybe a small group member, falls on hard times, clearly needs a hand up. Those moments never seem to pop up at convenient times, do they? In fact, if your experience is like mine, they happen at the most inopportune times that don't usually fit my schedule or my budget. And yet John here says that those moments, even more so than the planned actions, are revealing of our heart and determine they're a reflection of the love that we have for others. There's this family I know. They were trying to think through how do we inject this value into our family's life and rhythms. And they came up with this motto that I really love. It says, "We do more than just offer to help." And I thought that was brilliant because, hey, let me know if you need any help. It's the safest offer on earth, right? No one ever says yes to that. And they just decided, we're not going to wait around for people to ask. We're going to be alert to opportunities to love people, and we're going to do them even when they aren't convenient for us. We're just going to love people. A couple weeks ago, I got to see another family live that motto out. I just had a big birthday, and I had this great master plan. It was going to be awesome. We were going to go, our whole family, we were going to go to my alma mater in North Carolina and go to a basketball game. And that may not sound like much, but I have a good friend who has really sweet tickets, like feet on the wood at mid-court tickets. And I'd been before, but with one kid or the other, never with my wife Joy, never the whole family. And I was really excited about all of us experiencing this together. Not just the game, but all the fun stuff to do around town that I wanted them to experience. Well, on the morning that we were set to leave, our son Karsten woke up sick, 102.5 degree fever sick. Confession, I had a weak moment, and I really thought long and hard about just drugging him up and dragging him out the door. Let's go. But the poor guy, he looked as bad as he felt. And I knew deep down that it was the right move to leave he and Mom behind. Someone had to take care of him, But guys, I was so bummed. Seriously, we all were. And that goodbye that morning was pretty emotional for all of us. But we had these friends, and they knew how excited we were about this trip. And they were heartbroken for us as well. And every day that Evangeline and I were gone, they stopped by and dropped off some of Joy and Karsten's favorite treats. It meant more to us than they realized. Not the least reason is they have one of the fullest calendars that I know of. But I think they got what John was saying here. That real love, the genuine article, the kind that determines whether we have a Rolex or a Bolex strapped to our wrist, it's not just action. It's sacrificial action. It's willing to be interrupted. And if John had stopped there, we could smile and say, "Oh," and just end in feel-good fashion. But he doesn't. He goes on to add a surprising charge to the end of verse 18, 1 John 3:18. He says, "Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." Those two little words turn much of what we think about loving people squarely on its head. It's as if John is ratcheting up the involvement factor. It's one thing to actively love someone, but it's another to ground a relationship in truth. We think oftentimes about loving people as doing whatever it takes to make them happier no matter what's going on in their lives. But John is saying that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is tell someone the truth. Not in your face, I just tell it like it is fashion. That's not love. That's being a jerk. But in a way that makes it clear that you care for them and that you are for them. I have a great friend back in Texas. His name's Glenn. We met together every week when we lived there. We've been out here for about 7.5 years, but Glenn and I met consistently. And one week I had an idea to ask him. I said, "Hey, Glenn, would you love me enough to come back next week and tell me something that you've seen in my life that you would have already told me if you weren't worried about how I would respond?" That's a big ask, right? Glenn was like, okay. But he came back the next week and he was ready, and he proceeded to tell me that I can be really, really stubborn. Ouch. What do you say to that? I argued with him. I didn't do that. I listened to him explain that he would watch me with my kids and sometimes not let them get a word in to explain themselves when we're having a conversation. And you know what? He was right. And it didn't feel like it that day, but Glenn gave me a great gift, because here we are years later, and I still think about his words in interactions with my kids today. He told me the truth, and for that, I'm forever grateful. At the end of that conversation, I thanked him. And I don't think that's an inconsequential step, because loving people in truth requires that we love them enough to graciously speak truth, but it also requires that we love people enough to receive it well also. If we open our lives up to people to speak in, we have a better opportunity to see and to address our blind spots and to grow in our faith and in our life in ways that we can't otherwise. You know, I occasionally get phone calls and emails from you guys, which I love. But I gotta say that you're usually not reaching out to me to tell me how awesome our church is or how great you're doing. If you want to share that with me, please contact me this week. I'd love to hear those stories. But for the most part, something's gone wrong. And more often than not, it's about some kind of relational conflict. A recent conversation, I was talking to someone, they came and they wanted to tell me about a problem that they were having with someone in their small group. Anybody ever had that go on? Nobody in my group, raise your hand. I listened, I asked lots of questions because I really wanted to understand what had gone down. And when I traced it back to a conversation that stung a little bit, I said, you know what I would do? And they grabbed their phone. I could tell they were like, oh, this is going to be good. And I said, I would go back to them and I would say, thank you. Stunned look on their face made it clear that's not what they were expecting to hear. But I went on and I said, look, it's rare that someone will love us enough to try to graciously speak truth into our lives, because quite frankly, it's just not worth it most of the time, because we run the risk of them being offended, and so they just won't do it. But from the sound of it, that's exactly what they've done. And what I would do if I were you is go back to them and love them enough to honor the difficult step that they took, even if you disagree with them. That God often speaks to us through other people. And this small group that you've talked about, that's a broken group, I actually think it's one of the healthiest ones I've ever heard of before. And I wish more people got to experience it. And you know what? To their great credit, they stayed. And they had that conversation. Now, I've often wondered in this letter why John seems so fixated on loving the people closest to us. Brothers and sisters, we hear him say. I mean, he had spent time with Jesus, and Jesus had made it pretty clear to his followers, hey, go out and take my message of love and grace to the ends of the earth. But John, I think, knew that it's hardest to love the people whose warts and annoying tendencies and maddening shortcomings we're so familiar with. I mean, it's one thing to love in missional bursts with people that we may not ever see again, but it's another to love through toilet paper hanging, toothpaste tube squeezing, over-talking, political disagreement familiarity, isn't it? But that, John says, that gritty everyday love, that's real love. And it was a love that he desperately wanted us to experience and to extend. Why? Well, because something beautiful happens when we do. Let's look at 1 John 4:10. He wrote, this is real love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his son as a sacrifice to take away our sins. Dear friends, since God loved us that much, we surely ought to love each other. No one has ever seen God, But if we love each other, God lives in us, and His love is brought to full expression in us. Now, there's a lot going on in these verses, but at the core of what John is saying is this: the love of God is most profoundly experienced when it's shared in an authentic way. The love of God is most profoundly experienced when it's shared in an authentic way. When a watching world catches us loving each other, honestly, sacrificially, giving out some of the almost too good to be true love that He's lavished on us, it puts skin on an invisible God that is love itself. Jesus prayed for that in John chapter 17, which we'll also read this week. We talk a lot about God's love, but we often miss that it's through us that love is expressed in tangible and life-giving ways to the people around us. And when we embrace that calling as conveyors of His authentic love, when our heart beats in rhythm with His, both we and the people on the receiving end feel fully alive. And that's amazing, but it's not easy. And John knew that the only way that we could get there is to be super clear once and for all as to who we are or who we can become in Jesus, no matter what anyone else has ever told us. And making sure we know that was His most urgent aim of all. How do I know that? Well, there's only one exclamation point in the entire letter. And my guess is it's probably not there by accident in 1 John 3:1. John, summoning all the passion and power that he can in a letter, writes, "See how very much our Father loves us, for He calls us His children, and that is what we are." John, now an old man, reflecting on the 3 years he'd spent with Jesus decades earlier and a lifetime of following and serving Him ever since, says, guys, don't miss this. You've been called a lot of things throughout your life, but that is not who you are. God says He loves you so much that He is willing to call you His own. Anchoring love, He says, comes with an exclamation point, not a question mark. It's a perfect love that casts out all fear and uncertainty. It's a love that never, ever, ever walks out. It's a love that constantly reminds us that we're enough, but calls us to who it knows we can become. It's a love that gave it all so that you and I could be called children of the King, exclamation point. Anchoring love, John says, comes with an exclamation point, not a question mark. And it's a love that Jesus made clear. It's always been closer than we think. In the book of Revelation, Jesus asked John, we'll read Revelation this week too, He asked John to write a letter to the church at Laodicea. It was one of 7 churches in the Roman Empire that was struggling under the weight of Emperor Nero's brutal oppression of Christianity. They had grown a little bit lukewarm in their faith. And Jesus asked John to write these words: "So be diligent, turn from your indifference. Look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in, and we'll share a meal together as friends." Some of you have been searching your whole life for a love like that. Something's felt off. You've known there had to be something more. And the whole time, Jesus was close, knocking. You know, maybe you heard that knock before, but you dismissed it, not knowing who or what it was. Or maybe there's something in your past that you thought disqualified you, made you unworthy of that love. But as you've read and discovered God's heart, you recognize that not only does he love you anyway, he's desperate to call you child and friend. And here at the end of the Anchored Life Challenge, you realize that he's just been on the other side of the door this whole time. This is the exclamation point. This is beautiful truth. This is anchoring love. You know, for the rest of us, that staggering love that once captured our hearts and felt so near has become familiar, maybe. And that intimate relationship that we once knew, the together and everything relationship, we've pushed it into the margins of our lives. But as we've read and heard from Jesus on page after page after page, in these verses today, he's saying something really, really clear to us. I'm near. I'm here. I loved it when we walked together, when we sat together, when we had meals together as friends. I won't force myself on you, but if you'll open that door, I'll come in and I'll carry it all with you like we used to. You know, we began the Anchored Life Challenge 7 weeks ago. We built it as a bucket list undertaking. And make no mistake about it, it is a Herculean task. And can I just say, I am so proud of you guys. But checking a box was never the point. We've been praying from the beginning for all of us that we would find and fall in love with Jesus for the first time or all over again as we experienced him on the pages of his word. As I was praying this prayer for you, for me, one day I went for a walk, grabbed my phone, popped my earbuds in, just started up the first worship playlist that I could find. And on came this song that we're about to sing at all of our campuses. I'd never heard it before, but it put words, beautiful words, to that prayer. And I couldn't help but smile at God's kindness as he said, hey, wrap up with this. So we're going to sing this over you at all of our campuses and give you time to reflect on what it is that you've found over the past several weeks or maybe here today. And when it's done, I'll come back out, close us out.